What happens when a man who can buy anything in the world discovers that the one thing he truly needs cannot be bought? Julian Blackwood, a billionaire whose name commanded respect in every boardroom, was a king in a world of glass and steel. But in the silent world of his own autistic son, Leo, he was a complete stranger. He had given his son the best doctors, the best therapists, the best of everything, except for what mattered. Then one chaotic evening, in a high-end restaurant, amidst the shattering of glass and the crushing weight of public judgment, an ordinary waitress did the impossible. She broke through his son's silence, not with money or power, but with a simple act of kindness that would shatter Julian's entire world. This is the story of how a moment of grace in a storm of chaos can melt the coldest heart and rebuild a family from the ashes of despair. The Gilded Sparrow was a temple of modern cuisine, a place where hushed tones and the delicate clinking of silverware were the accepted liturgy. It was the kind of restaurant Julian Blackwood owned 3 of, but never dined in. He preferred the sterile silence of his penthouse office, where deals were the only things on the menu. Yet tonight was different. Tonight was a performance. His fiancée, Isabella Beaumont, had insisted they present a veneer of normalcy. It was a trial run she'd cooed for the galas and charity balls that would soon define their married life. Julian sat stiffly, his tailored Tom Ford suit feeling more like a straitjacket than a symbol of his status. Across the table, Isabella looked radiant, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat, a perfect counterpart to his own polished exterior. Between them, however, sat the anomaly the variable Julian could never quite solve, his 7-year-old son, Leo. Leo lived in a world of his own, a world Julian had spent millions trying to map, but could never enter. The boy was beautiful, with his father's dark hair and his late mother's startlingly blue eyes. But those eyes rarely met anyone else's. They were fixed now on the intricate patterns of the damask tablecloth, his small fingers tracing the woven leaves, as if reading a story only he could see. In his other hand, he clutched a small, perfectly smooth grey stone, his anchor in a sea of overwhelming sensory input. His full-time behavioral therapist and nanny Mrs. Gable sat beside him, a tense, vigilant presence. "He's being so good, isn't he?" Isabella said, her voice a fraction, too loud, too bright. She didn't look at Leo, but at Julian, seeking approval. Maybe all that new therapy is finally working. Julian didn't answer. He knew this quiet was a fragile truce, not a victory. The restaurant was a minefield. The murmur of conversation, the scrape of a chair, the unexpected glint of light off a wine glass, any of it could shatter the peace. He felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach, an emotion he ruthlessly crushed in the boardroom, but was powerless against in the presence of his own son. He loved Leo with a fierce, desperate ache, but it was a love expressed through funding, through hiring the best, through creating a protective bubble of wealth. He didn't know how to simply be a father. His wife, Elena, had known. She had been Leo's bridge to the world, and since her death 2 years ago, that bridge had collapsed, leaving Julian and Leo on opposite sides of a silent, uncrossable chasm. The chaos, when it came, was sudden and catastrophic. A young busboy hurrying through the narrow aisle stumbled. A tray laden with glasses and dessert plates crashed to the marble floor. The sound was a sonic explosion in the restaurant's curated calm. Gasps and startled cries rippled through the room. For Leo, it was the end of the world. A keening wail ripped from his throat, a sound of pure, undiluted terror. His body went rigid, his hands flying to his ears, the precious grey stone skittering under the table. He began to rock violently, the raw anguish in his cries, turning heads at every table. Patrons stared, their expressions a mixture of pity, annoyance, and morbid curiosity. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Isabella hissed her face, a mask of mortified embarrassment. "Julian, do something!" Mrs. Gable immediately went into her professional mode, trying to use the scripted calming techniques. "Leo, use your words. It's just a loud noise. We're safe. Deep breaths." Her voice was firm but held no warmth, her touch clinical as she tried to restrain his rocking. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Leo's distress escalated into a full-blown meltdown. He thrashed in his seat, his small fists beating against his head, the universal sign of a child completely overwhelmed and trying to drown out the sensory assault. Julian felt a hot flush of shame and helplessness creep up his neck. He was Julian Blackwood, the titan of industry, a man who could command the attention of world leaders. But here in this public space, he was just a failing father with a screaming child. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the other diners. He saw the failure reflected in Isabella's perfectly sculpted face. He stood up, ready to grab Leo to flee the scene, to escape the crushing weight of it all. And that's when he saw her. A waitress who had been serving a table nearby stopped. Her name tag read Clara. She wasn't looking at the spectacle with fear or annoyance. She was looking at Leo with an expression of profound, aching understanding. While everyone else saw a problem, she, it seemed, saw a person. Ignoring the restaurant manager who was hurrying towards their table, she moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. She knelt on the floor a few feet away from Leo, making herself small, non-threatening. She didn't speak to him. She didn't try to touch him. She simply entered his space on his terms. "Leave it!" Julian barked, his voice rough with panic. "Mrs. Gable has it under control." But Mrs. Gable clearly did not, and the waitress Clara paid him no mind. Her focus was entirely on the terrified little boy. Clara Evans knew that sound. It wasn't the cry of a spoiled child having a tantrum. It was the sound of a nervous system on fire. It was the sound her own younger brother Daniel had made 1,000 times. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated overwhelm. Every instinct in her, honed by years of loving and caring for Daniel, screamed at her to help. She ignored the billionaire's command, the manager's frantic hiss of, "Miss Evans, get back to your station," and the horrified glare from the woman with the diamonds. She saw only the child. Kneeling on the cold marble, she kept her gaze soft and indirect, focusing on a spot on the floor just to Leo's left. She knew direct eye contact could feel like an attack. She began to hum a low, soft, monotonous tune without melody or words. It was a simple grounding sound, a human drone to counter the jarring chaos of the crash. Leo's thrashing didn't stop, but the pitch of his wail changed a flicker of awareness in his storm of panic. Clara noticed the sugar caddies on the table. Slowly, so as not to make any sudden movements, she reached for them. She took out 3 pink packets, 2 blue and 1 white, and laid them on the floor in front of her. Then, with methodical precision, she began to tap them. Tap, 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 tap. She created a simple, predictable rhythm, a pattern in the chaos. Tap, 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 tap. Julian watched, mesmerized and bewildered. Mrs. Gable had frozen her textbook methods useless. Isabella was fuming. But Julian couldn't look away from the scene on the floor. This waitress was doing nothing he had ever seen in any of Leo's expensive therapy sessions. She wasn't correcting or instructing. She was joining him in the storm, offering a quiet, stable anchor. Leo's cries began to subside into ragged, gasping sobs. His rocking slowed. His head, which had been buried in his arms, lifted slightly. His terrified blue eyes shimmering with tears, flickered towards the pattern of sugar packets on the floor. He saw the gentle rhythmic movement of Clara's fingers. He heard the low, steady hum. Clara didn't look up. She kept her focus on her task, giving him the space to observe without pressure. Then she saw the small grey stone near her foot. She recognized it for what it was, a talisman, a piece of his world. With one hand still tapping, she slowly slid the other towards the stone and nudged it gently into the space between them. She didn't pick it up. She just made it available. It was an invitation. Time seemed to slow down. The murmuring of the restaurant faded into a dull roar for Julian. His entire universe had shrunk to this small patch of floor. He held his breath. Leo's small, trembling hand uncurled from his ear. It hovered for a moment, then reached out not for the stone, but for Clara. His fingers brushed against the back of her hand, the one that was tapping the sugar packets. It was a tentative, questioning touch. Clara stopped humming and tapping. She turned her hand over, palm up, a gesture of silent offering. She still did not look at Leo's face. Slowly, Leo crawled the short distance towards her. He picked up his grey stone, its familiar smoothness, a comfort in his palm. He looked at Clara's open hand. Then he did something that made Julian's heart stop. He deliberately, carefully placed his precious stone into the center of her palm. For Leo, this was the ultimate act of trust. He had never, not once, willingly given his stone to anyone, not to Julian, not to Mrs. Gable, not even to his mother before she passed. It was a part of him. Clara's fingers gently closed around the stone, her hand radiating a gentle warmth. Only then did she lift her head and look at Leo. And for the first time that evening, Leo made direct eye contact with a stranger. His tears had stopped. His breathing was still ragged, but the terror had receded from his eyes, replaced by a dawning, weary curiosity. He didn't smile, but a sense of peace settled over him, a calm so profound it was almost shocking. Julian felt a powerful, unfamiliar emotion constrict his chest. It was a raw, painful, beautiful mix of awe and envy. This woman, this waitress with a simple name tag, had reached his son in a way he never could. She had walked into the fortress of Leo's silence, not by force, but by invitation. She hadn't just stopped a meltdown, she had forged a connection. In that single breathtaking moment, watching his son place his most treasured object into the hand of a complete stranger, Julian Blackwood's carefully constructed ice-cold heart didn't just melt. It shattered. The restaurant manager finally arrived, flustered and apologetic. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry. We'll handle this immediately." Julian raised a hand, his eyes never leaving Clara and Leo. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but with an undeniable authority that cut through the air. "Don't you dare." He then looked directly at Clara, who was now just sitting quietly on the floor, letting Leo process. "What is your name?" "Clara Evans," she replied softly, her gaze returning to the boy. "Don't go anywhere, Clara Evans," Julian said. "I need to talk to you." The ride home was a study in contrasts. Leo, for the first time ever, after a public outing, was not withdrawn and agitated. He was quiet, nestled in his car seat, turning the warm grey stone over and over in his hands. Clara had gently passed it back to him before they left. A silent promise returned. In the front, Mrs. Gable was unnervingly silent, her professional pride clearly wounded. Beside Julian, Isabella was anything but. "I cannot believe the humiliation. Julian," she seethed, her voice a venomous whisper, "letting some waitress handle your son like a stray animal on the floor of a restaurant. People were filming. This will be all over the gossip blogs by morning. What were you thinking?" Julian barely heard her. His mind was replaying the scene on a loop, Clara's calm descent to the floor, the rhythmic tapping, the low hum, and the final staggering moment of trust when Leo handed over his stone. He had spent a fortune on specialists who approached Leo like a complex puzzle to be solved. Clara had approached him like a human being to be understood. The difference was staggering. She helped him, Julian said, his voice flat and distant. She made a spectacle, Isabella shot back. Your son needs discipline, a firm hand, not to be coddled by some bleeding heart girl who probably makes minimum wage. The crassness of her comment struck Julian with surprising force. He looked at her perfect makeup, her expensive jewelry, her beautiful cold face, and saw for the first time how little she truly understood or cared to understand about the most important person in his life. The thought was deeply unsettling. Back in the marble and glass expanse of his penthouse, after Leo was put to bed and Isabella had departed in a huff, Julian sat alone in his office, overlooking the glittering city. He couldn't shake the image of Clara Evans from his mind. He did what he always did. When faced with a variable he didn't understand, he gathered data. He made a call to his head of security, a man named Peterson, who could find out anything about anyone. I need a full confidential background check on a woman named Clara Evans. She works at the Gilded Sparrow. I want to know everything, urgently. By 3 a.m., the report was on his encrypted server. Julian read it, a knot of something unidentifiable tightening in his gut. Clara Evans, 26, grew up in a working-class suburb. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a school secretary. She had one sibling, a younger brother, Daniel, aged 19. And there it was. Daniel was diagnosed with severe autism spectrum disorder and required round-the-clock care. Clara had been on a full scholarship at Columbia University, studying for a dual degree in childhood psychology and special education. She had been top of her class. But in her final year, her father had a debilitating heart attack, forcing him into early retirement. The family's finances collapsed. Clara had dropped out of school just one semester shy of her degree to work and help support her family, specifically the mounting costs of Daniel's care. She worked 2 jobs, the waitressing gig at night, and as a teacher's aide at a local community center during the day. This wasn't some lucky guess or a trick. This was lived experience. This was love. The information settled Julian's suspicions, but also pricked at his conscience. He had invaded her privacy to validate her humanity. The realization left a sour taste in his mouth, but it also solidified his resolve. The next afternoon, he sent a car to her modest apartment building in Queens. Clara, bewildered, agreed to meet him, thinking it was about a complaint from the restaurant. She was led not to his office, but to a private lounge in his building. She sat opposite him, her posture straight, her gaze direct. She wasn't intimidated by the wealth that surrounded her. She looked tired, the lines of exhaustion visible around her eyes, but her expression was clear and composed. "Miss Evans," Julian began, his voice formal, "I want to thank you for what you did for my son last night." "I just did what I thought was right," she said simply. He was scared. "You were effective. More effective than a team of specialists I pay a small fortune for." He paused, studying her. "I had my head of security run a background check on you." Clara's composure fractured. A flash of anger and violation crossed her face. "You what? Why on earth would you do that?" "I had to understand," Julian admitted, feeling a rare flicker of shame. "I saw your academic record. I know about your brother Daniel." Clara stood up. Her cheeks flushed. "My family is not a file for you to read, Mr. Blackwood. If that's all, I should go." "Please wait," he said, his voice losing its corporate edge, replaced by something more urgent. I'm not telling you this to intimidate you. I'm telling you this because I want to make you an offer. I want you to come and work for me. For Leo. She stopped, turning back to him with a wary expression. I will pay you 5 times what you're making at your 2 jobs combined. He continued, falling back on the only language he was truly comfortable with. You will be Leo's private developmental companion. You will have access to any resource you need, sensory rooms, educational tools, anything. I will pay off your student loans. I will cover the full cost of your brother's care. He laid it all out, a life-changing sum, a golden ticket out of her struggles. He expected immediate, grateful acceptance. Instead, Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his, and he saw not gratitude, but a deep, unsettling caution. Why? She asked quietly. Because you reached him. Julian said the answer, raw and honest. You did something I, with all my resources, can't do. I want that for him. He needs it. Clara was silent for a long time. The offer was a miracle, a solution to every prayer she and her mother had whispered in desperation. But she had seen men like Julian Blackwood, before men who threw money at problems, expecting to buy not just a service, but a soul. She would not be another one of his assets to be managed. I have conditions, she finally said, her voice steady and firm. Julian raised an eyebrow, unaccustomed to being dictated to. Go on. First, I am not a nanny or a governess. My title will be Developmental Specialist, or something similar. I will report to you and only you. Mrs. Gable and I will need to have a very clear understanding of our respective roles. My methods are not always by the book. Done. Julian agreed immediately. Second, my focus is Leo. Solely Leo. I am not here to be part of your social life or to make your family appear a certain way. My job is to help your son, not manage your image. The barb was aimed directly at the memory of Isabella, and Julian had the decency to look momentarily abashed. Understood. And third, she said, her voice softening slightly, I work with Leo, not on him. I won't force him. I will follow his lead. There will be good days, and there will be very, very bad days. You can't fire me on a bad day. You need to give me your trust, and you need to give me time. Julian looked at this young woman who should have been overwhelmed by his offer, calmly negotiating the terms of her employment, as if she were a CEO in a merger. She wasn't just taking a job. She was accepting a mission, and she was protecting both herself and his son in the process. He felt a grudging, then growing respect. You have my word, Miss Evans, he said. Clara, she corrected him gently. Clara, he repeated. When can you start? The Blackwood penthouse was less a home and more a museum of modern wealth. It was a sprawling space of white walls, gleaming chrome and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of the city below. It was beautiful, sterile and profoundly cold. For a child like Leo, it must have felt like living inside a drum, every sound echoing every reflective surface, a potential sensory shock. Clara's first act was not to engage with Leo, but to change his environment. With Julian's hesitant permission, she transformed a spare guest room into a sensory haven. She covered the stark white walls with soft grey fabric panels to absorb sound. She replaced the harsh LED lighting with dimmable, warm-toned lamps. She brought in a weighted blanket, a soft crash pad, a tactile wall with different textures, and a small tent filled with plush cushions where Leo could retreat when the world became too much. Julian watched the transformation with a detached curiosity. Mrs. Gable watched with thinly veiled disapproval, muttering about disrupting routines. But Leo was drawn to the room like a moth to a gentle flame. He would spend hours inside, running his hands over the velvet and burlap on the tactile wall, or lying under the weighted blanket in his tent, the quiet pressure a calming balm on his frayed nerves. Clara's approach to Leo was a masterpiece of patience. She never forced interaction. She practiced what she called parallel engagement. If Leo was lining up his toy cars, she would sit nearby and line up blocks. If he was silently looking at a picture book, she would sit across the room and read her own. She became a safe, predictable part of his landscape. She didn't demand anything from him, and in doing so, she gave him the freedom to offer something of his own. The breakthrough came 2 weeks in the middle of the new sensory room. Clara was humming that same low, monotonous tune from the restaurant while building a tower of soft blocks. Leo, who had been rocking gently in his tent, crawled out. He picked up a block, crawled over to her tower, and placed it carefully on top. He didn't look at her, but his participation was a shout in his silent world. Clara's heart swelled, but she kept her reaction minimal, not wanting to startle him. "Thank you, Leo," she said softly. "A blue one, that's a good choice." From there, the small victories began to accumulate. He started allowing her to sit next to him. He would occasionally tap her hand to get her attention. One afternoon, while they were looking at a book about animals, he pointed to a picture of a cat and made a soft "cur" sound. It was the first time Julian had heard him make a verbal attempt at a word in over a year. Julian found himself rearranging his schedule, leaving the office earlier, finding excuses to be home. He would stand in the doorway of the sensory room, a silent observer watching Clara and Leo. He saw a joy and a peace in his son that he thought had been lost forever. He also found himself talking to Clara, asking her about her methods, about Leo's day, and slowly about her life. He learned about her dream of opening a small school for kids like her brother Daniel. He saw the passion in her eyes, the fierce intelligence that had been buried under the exhaustion of her circumstances. A fragile, tentative friendship began to form in the quiet moments of the evening after Leo was asleep. But their budding peace was not to go unchallenged. Isabella Beaumont was a constant disruptive presence. She had weathered Julian's anger after the restaurant incident, with practiced apologies, blaming her reaction on the shock of it all. But she viewed Clara with an immediate and potent hostility. She saw the shift in Julian, the way his attention was now divided between his business and his home. She saw the bond forming between the billionaire, the boy, and the beautiful, unassuming woman he had hired, and she recognized it as a mortal threat to her carefully laid plans. Isabella's attacks were subtle at first. She would, accidentally, wear a strong perfume that would send Leo into a state of sensory distress, then blame the episode on Clara's unstructured methods. She would question Clara's qualifications in front of Julian, referring to her as the former waitress, and suggesting they hire someone with a proper PhD. "Darling, it's wonderful that she's so sweet with him," Isabella would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "But Leo needs a real clinician, not just a sympathetic friend. We have to think about his future. Our future." Clara weathered the barbs with quiet dignity, refusing to be drawn into a fight. Her focus remained on Leo. But she was not naive. She saw the cold calculation in Isabella's eyes. She knew this woman was not just a rival. She was a danger to the fragile world of trust she was building with Leo. The situation came to a head over the Blackwood Foundation's annual charity gala, a lavish affair that Isabella was chairing. It was the pinnacle of the New York social season. "Julian, we simply must have Leo there just for a little while," Isabella insisted one evening. It would be such a wonderful photo opportunity. Julian Blackwood and family supporting children's causes. It shows a softer side of you. It's good for your image, for our image. Absolutely not, Clara said, stepping into the conversation before Julian could respond. She had overheard from the hallway and couldn't stay silent. A loud, crowded gala with flashing cameras. It would be catastrophic for him. It would set him back for weeks. Isabella turned to her, her smile tightening into a venomous line. This doesn't concern you, Clara. This is a family matter. Leo is my concern. Clara retorted, her voice firm but even. And putting him through that ordeal for a photo opportunity is not only irresponsible, it's cruel. The air crackled with tension. Julian was caught between the two women. The Julian of a month ago would have sided with Isabella, prioritizing public perception and business. But now, he looked at Clara, who stood her ground, not for herself but for his son. And he looked at Isabella, who saw his son as a prop. Clara is right, Julian said, his voice final. Leo will not be there. The fury in Isabella's eyes was terrifying. She didn't say another word. She simply gave Clara a look that promised retribution. It was a declaration of war. And Clara knew, with a sinking feeling in her stomach, that Isabella Beaumont was a woman who would stop at nothing to win. Isabella Beaumont was a master strategist when it came to social warfare. She understood that a frontal assault was crude and often ineffective. To eliminate Clara, she needed to destroy not her methods, but her credibility. She needed to sever the one thing Clara had painstakingly built with Julian trust. And the most effective way to do that was to prey on a billionaire's greatest fear, that everyone around him is only after his money. Her plan was as cruel as it was meticulous. She began by subtly planting seeds of doubt in Julian's mind. She would make offhand comments, cloaked in feigned concern. That girl is so devoted, Julian. I just hope she's not getting too attached. People in her position can sometimes develop unrealistic expectations. Or I was looking at the household accounts. The expenses for Leo's sensory tools are quite significant. You're so generous, darling. I hope your kindness isn't being taken for granted. Julian, busy and stressed with a major corporate merger, brushed off her comments, but the insidious whispers lodged themselves in the back of his mind. He was by nature a suspicious man, a trait honed by years of navigating corporate espionage and false friendships. The centerpiece of Isabella's plot was a magnificent diamond and sapphire bracelet. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a Blackwood family heirloom, a piece Julian's mother had worn, and one he had intended to one day give to his wife. Isabella knew its significance. She had been asking about it, hinting that she would love to wear it to the upcoming gala. A week before the event, Isabella made her move. She knew Clara's routine intimately. Every Thursday afternoon, while Leo was having his music therapy session via video call in the sensory room, Clara would take a 30-minute break in her own quarters, a small but comfortable suite on a separate floor. That Thursday, Isabella feigned a migraine and stayed home from a charity luncheon. Once Clara was in her room and Mrs. Gable was occupied with household staff, Isabella slipped into Julian's master suite. She opened his private safe. She had memorized the code months ago by watching him over his shoulder, and removed the heirloom bracelet. Then, with her heart pounding with malicious excitement, she went to Clara's suite. She knew the staff had master keys. She let herself in the act of violation, making her feel powerful. It took her only seconds to slip the bracelet into the side pocket of Clara's simple canvas tote bag, the one she carried to and from work each day. The final piece of her trap was designed to be irrefutable. Using a disposable prepaid card and a public Wi-Fi network, she made a large anonymous donation of $10,000 to the online fund that Clara's mother had set up for Daniel's long-term care facility. The donation was timed to appear in their account that same afternoon. It would look like the first payment from a sale. Desperate people do desperate things. The discovery was staged for maximum impact. That evening, as Julian was getting ready for the gala, he was now attending alone. Isabella came to his dressing room, her face a perfect mask of distress. "Julian, darling, I have something terrible to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to look at your mother's bracelet one more time, to feel close to her, you know. But it's gone. The safe is open, and it's gone." Julian's blood ran cold. He immediately went to the safe. The bracelet was missing. His first call was to Peterson, his head of security. "Lock down the building. No one in or out. I want a full sweep. Something's been stolen." Isabella played her part to perfection. "Oh, Julian, it must be a mistake. Who would do such a thing?" Then she delivered the killing blow. "The only people who have been on this floor today, besides the regular staff, are you, me, and Clara. She came up to ask you a question about Leo's schedule this morning." The mention of Clara's name hung in the air. Julian's mind immediately rebelled against the idea. Clara. The woman who had given his son back his peace? It was impossible. "Don't be ridiculous, Isabella," he snapped. "I know it sounds crazy," she said, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a silk handkerchief. "But you know her situation is difficult. With her brother, people can be pushed to do things they wouldn't normally do when they're desperate." The whispers from the past weeks echoed in Julian's head. Unrealistic expectations, kindness being taken for granted, desperation. The poison was working. Peterson's team was efficient. They began a quiet, systematic search of the staff quarters. Julian stood like a statue in his living room, his mind at war with itself. His gut, his heart, told him Clara was innocent. But the facts were cold. The bracelet was gone. She had access, and she had a powerful motive. 15 minutes later, Peterson returned, his face grim. He wasn't alone. 2 of his security staff stood behind him, and between them was Clara, her face pale with confusion and fear. In one of the guards' gloved hands was a clear evidence bag. Inside, the diamond and sapphire bracelet glittered malevolently under the penthouse lights. "We found it in her tote bag, sir," Peterson said, his voice devoid of emotion. "In a side pocket." Julian stared at the bracelet, then at Clara. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. I don't understand," she stammered, looking from the bracelet to Julian. "I've never seen that before in my life. I swear." "Oh, Clara, how could you—" Isabella gasped, stepping forward to clutch Julian's arm, a perfect portrait of betrayed innocence. Julian's world tilted on its axis. He looked at Clara's terrified face, and for a moment he saw the woman who had knelt on the floor and calmed his son's storm. But then he saw the hard evidence, the bracelet, the motive, the whispers, his corporate-trained mind, the part of him that always looked for the angle the risk the betrayal took over. Trust was a liability. He had let his guard down, and this was the price. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He wanted her to deny it, to give him something, anything to believe in. "No, Julian, of course not," she cried, her voice breaking. "You have to believe me. Someone must have put it there." Her eyes darted to Isabella, a flicker of dawning horror and understanding in her gaze. "Who would do that, Clara?" Isabella asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We've all been so good to you here." The final piece of evidence was delivered by Peterson a moment later. "Sir, we also ran a quick financial check, as per protocol. A $10,000 anonymous deposit was made to her family's medical fund this afternoon." It was a checkmate, a story of theft motive and payment, all perfectly packaged. Julian felt a cold, familiar wall of ice slide back into place around his heart. He had been a fool. He had mistaken an act of professional skill for genuine connection. He had let himself be vulnerable, and he had been betrayed. He looked at Clara, his expression turning to stone. "Get her out of my house," he said, his voice flat and dead. "Pack her things. She is not to see my son. She is never to set foot on this property again. Peterson, I won't press charges, but I want her gone. Now." Clara stared at him, her face crumbling in sheer, uncomprehending agony. It wasn't the accusation of theft that broke her. It was the look of absolute conviction in his eyes. He believed it. He believed she was capable of this. "Julian, please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this. What about Leo?" The mention of his son was like a knife twist. "You forfeited the right to speak his name the moment you decided to steal from my family," he said, turning his back on her. It was the cruelest thing he had ever said, and it was the only way he could protect himself from the searing pain of his own disillusionment. As security led a sobbing, protesting Clara away, Julian stood unmoving, a king once more in his cold, silent castle, feeling nothing but the hollow, bitter victory of being right all along. The silence that descended upon the penthouse after Clara's departure was heavier and more oppressive than ever before. It was a dead silence, devoid of the humming and soft chatter that had begun to fill the corners of their lives. For the first 2 days, Julian told himself it was for the best. He had excised a threat, protected his family. He threw himself into his work with a renewed ferocity, attending the gala with Isabella on his arm, a perfect, powerful couple. But the victory felt like ash in his mouth. The first undeniable sign that he had made a catastrophic error was Leo. The morning after Clara left, Leo woke up, and his first unspoken question was for her. He walked to the door of the sensory room, which now felt like an empty stage, and waited. When she didn't appear, a quiet agitation began to build. He refused to eat. He wouldn't engage with Mrs. Gable, pushing away the books and blocks he had once shared with Clara. By evening, he had retreated completely into himself, sitting in a corner, rocking his precious grey stone, clutched in a white-knuckled grip. On the second day, he had a meltdown so severe, so prolonged, that it terrified Julian. It wasn't triggered by a loud noise or a disruption, but by a profound and aching absence. He wailed her name, a fractured, desperate sound that was more feeling than word. "Kara! Kara!" The sound shattered Julian's icy resolve. He sat on the floor outside Leo's room, listening to his son's heartbroken cries, and the facts of the case began to feel less and less solid. Could the woman who had forged this bond, who had given his son this voice, truly be a common thief? His heart, which he had tried so hard to silence, screamed no. The catalyst for the truth came from an unexpected source, his sister Catherine. Catherine Blackwood was a sharp, pragmatic woman who ran the family's philanthropic foundation. She was fiercely protective of Leo and had kept a watchful, skeptical distance from Isabella. She had met Clara on several occasions and had been deeply impressed. She arrived at the penthouse on the 3rd day, having heard whispers of what had happened. She found Julian looking haggard and the apartment funereal. "What have you done, Julian?" she asked, her tone cutting straight through his defenses. He recounted the story, the missing bracelet, its discovery in Clara's bag the anonymous deposit. Catherine listened, her expression growing stormier with each word. And you just believed it. You believed Isabella, a woman who sees your son as a social accessory, over the one person who has made him happy. The evidence was irrefutable, Julian argued weakly. Evidence can be manufactured, Catherine shot back. Isabella has been jealous of that girl from day one. Did you even look deeper? Did you check the security footage? Did you question anyone else? Or did you just take the easiest, most cynical path and fire the one good thing to happen to this family in years? Her words were a slap in the face. Stung and shamed, Julian realized he hadn't. He had accepted the surface-level facts because it was easier than confronting the possibility that his fiancée was a monster and that he himself had made a terrible judgment call. He immediately summoned Peterson. The security footage from the hallway outside my suite and Clara's room on Thursday. I want to see it now. Peterson looked uncomfortable. There's an issue, sir. The footage from those 2 cameras for that specific 2-hour window is corrupted. My tech team says it's an irretrievable glitch. A glitch in his multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art security system, in the 2 exact locations that mattered. The coincidence was too great to be believed. An irretrievable glitch is not an answer. Julian snarled, the full force of his corporate power returning. I want your best tech, a forensic analyst, I don't care who. I want that data recovered. Find out if it was a glitch or if it was erased, and find out who had the authorization to do it. While the tech team worked, Catherine did her own quiet investigation. She spoke to the household staff, the maids and cooks who were invisible to Isabella, but saw everything. She spoke to Maria, the head housekeeper, a woman who had been with the family for 20 years and adored Leo. Maria was hesitant, at first afraid of losing her job. But Catherine's gentle probing and genuine concern for Leo and Clara coaxed the story out of her. Mrs. Beaumont? She is not what she seems, Maria whispered, wringing her hands. On Thursday, she said she had a headache. But I saw her. She was not in her room. I saw her near Miss Clara's suite just for a moment. She looked frightened, like a fox in the henhouse. The pieces were clicking into place. The final damning evidence came from Julian's tech team hours later. The lead analyst, a young genius named Ben, came to Julian's office, his face pale. Mr. Blackwood, it wasn't a glitch, Ben said, his voice low. The data was wiped, deliberately. It was done using a high-level administrative command code. There are only 3 people with that level of access on the system, you, Peterson, and one that was assigned to Miss Beaumont's primary laptop for household management. It was the smoking gun. Isabella hadn't just framed Clara. She had orchestrated a sophisticated cover-up, using the very access Julian had given her. The rage that filled Julian was cold and absolute. It was not the hot, panicked anger he had felt before, but the calculated fury of a man who had been played for a fool and whose child was now paying the price. He found Isabella in the main living area, preening over seating charts for another charity event. He dismissed the event planner with a flick of his hand. "Julian, darling, what's wrong? You look awful," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "The footage wasn't corrupted, Isabella," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "It was erased, using your access code." The color drained from her face. Her composure for the first time cracked. "What, that's absurd. Someone must have stolen my code. And I suppose a member of my staff also saw you lurking outside Clara's room on Thursday," he countered, watching her crumble. "And that anonymous donation to Daniel's fund. It's amazing what forensic accountants can trace, even from so-called anonymous sources. A prepaid card purchased with cash at a bodega 2 blocks from your gym." Isabella stared at him, her mask completely gone, replaced by a snarl of pure venom. That girl was replacing me. You were looking at her, talking to her. You were choosing her. And that little inconvenience over me. The casual cruelty with which she referred to Leo was the final unforgivable sin. Julian looked at her, at the woman he had almost married, and felt nothing but a profound, chilling disgust. He had been so blinded by her beauty, her social standing, and what she represented, that he had failed to see the utter emptiness within. "My son is not an inconvenience." He said each word a chip of ice. "He is my son, and you used him. You hurt him to get at an innocent woman who was helping him." He walked over to his desk and pressed the intercom. "Peterson, please escort Miss Beaumont from the premises. Her belongings will be sent to her. She is no longer welcome in this building or in my life." Isabella erupted in a tirade of threats and insults, but Julian didn't hear them. He had already turned away his mind on only one thing, finding Clara, and begging for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. The address Julian had for Clara led him to a walk-up apartment building in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood in Queens. The opulence of his life felt a world away as he climbed the 4 flights of stairs, the scent of cooking and the sounds of everyday life filling the hallway. He knocked on the door of apartment 4B, his heart hammering against his ribs with a mixture of hope and dread. The door was opened by a woman in her 50s, with tired, kind eyes, Clara's mother. She recognized him instantly, and her expression hardened. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice laced with a mother's protective fury. "Haven't you done enough damage?" "Please," Julian said, his own voice sounding hollow to his ears. "I need to speak with her. I made a terrible mistake. I know the truth." He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes before she sighed a deep, weary sound. "She hasn't left her room in 2 days. She won't eat. You didn't just fire her, Mr. Blackwood. You broke her spirit." She let him in. The apartment was small, modest, but filled with a warmth his penthouse had never known. Family photos lined the walls, and on a small table Julian saw a picture of a smiling teenage boy, Daniel. It was here in this humble space that true wealth resided. Clara was in her room, sitting on her bed, staring out the window. She looked small and fragile, a shadow of the confident woman who had stood up to him. When she saw Julian, she flinched, pulling her knees to her chest. "I came to apologize," he said softly, standing in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. "There are no words to express how sorry I am. I was a blind, arrogant fool. I know you're innocent. I know Isabella framed you. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Clara didn't look at him. She just kept staring out the window. "You didn't believe me," she whispered, her voice raw. "You looked at me and you thought I was a thief." "I did." He admitted, the shame tasting like poison. "And I will regret that for the rest of my life. I let my cynicism, my suspicion of the world, override what I knew in my heart to be true. I betrayed your trust. I betrayed my son." He took a hesitant step into the room. "Leo, he's asking for you. He won't stop. He's miserable, Clara. He needs you. I need you. I don't just mean for Leo. I was learning from you. You were teaching me how to be a father." At the mention of Leo, her resolve finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a deep, weary pain. "How can I come back?" she asked. "How can I work for a man who believed the worst of me so easily?" It was the question he had been dreading, the one he had no answer for. All he had was the truth. "You can't," he said, his voice cracking. "You can't work for that man. because he doesn't exist anymore. He was shattered when I heard my son crying your name. I'm asking you to come back and help me build someone better. Not as an employee, as a partner. A partner in helping Leo. Please, Clara. For him. He held his breath, knowing he deserved to be rejected. He had offered her money before, but now he was offering the only thing of value he had left, his broken, humbled self. She looked at him for a long, agonizing moment. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the desperation, and she thought of Leo alone and sad in that big, cold penthouse. Her heart, which had been so bruised and battered, made the decision for her. Her return was not marked by fanfare, but by a quiet, profound rightness. The moment she walked through the door of the penthouse, Leo, who had been sitting listlessly on the floor, looked up. His eyes widened. A slow, radiant smile spread across his face, a genuine, soul-deep smile that Julian had never seen before. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not walked, but ran to her, burying his face in her side and wrapping his small arms around her legs. He held on as if he were afraid she would disappear again. Clara knelt and hugged him back, tears of relief streaming down her face, her own pain forgotten in the face of the boy's pure, unadulterated joy. Over Leo's head, her eyes met Julian's. In that shared gaze, a silent understanding passed between them. It was a promise of a new beginning, built not on a contract, but on a shared love for the little boy who was the center of their world. The weeks that followed were a transformation. Julian's life reoriented itself. Board meetings were rescheduled around Leo's therapy sessions. Business trips were shortened. He didn't just watch from the doorway anymore. He joined Clara and Leo on the floor. He learned to listen to Leo's silence, to understand his cues, to be patient, to just be there. They planted a small herb garden on the terrace, together the three of them. Julian, in his expensive suit, kneeling in the dirt next to his son, with Clara guiding Leo's hands as he patted the soil around a tiny basil plant. One afternoon, as a ladybug landed on Leo's finger, he looked up, not at Clara, but at his father, and said with perfect clarity, "Dad, bug." Julian's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Clara, who was smiling at him, her face glowing in the afternoon sun. In that simple, perfect moment, surrounded by the scent of lavender and earth, with his son's voice, a miracle in the air, Julian Blackwood understood. He hadn't just hired a specialist for his son. He had found the missing pieces of his family. They weren't a billionaire, a boy, and a former waitress anymore. They were a father learning to love a boy, finding his voice, and a woman who had shown them both the way. They were finally a family coming home. This story is a powerful reminder that the greatest connections in life are not forged with money or power, but with empathy, patience, and the courage to see the person behind the diagnosis. Julian Blackwood had the world at his fingertips, but it took an ordinary woman's extraordinary kindness to show him the universe that existed within his own son. It reminds us that sometimes the person who seems to need the most help is actually the one who can teach us the most about love, trust, and what it truly means to be a family. What did you think of Clara's incredible patience? Do you believe a single moment can truly change a person's entire life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of human connection, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and move you. Thank you for listening.